Greetings to everyone. I'm going to share my research on neighborhood collective efficacy and protective effects on child maltreatment. It's a systematic literature review. About the presenters, my name is Alhassan, and I'm a PhD student with the Department of Social Work and Social Administration, the University of Hong Kong. I have a research interest in child maltreatment prevention, mostly focusing on neighborhood and then community-based mechanisms. And my supervisor, who is also a co-presenter here, Professor Clifton Emery, is an associate professor with the Department of Social Work and Social Administration, the University of Hong Kong. He has also an interest in informal social control, child maltreatment, human trafficking, and refugee issues. Over the years, following the publication on the battered child syndrome, approaches and mechanisms to protect children from maltreatment have evolved. To date, there has been a continuing shift from a focus on statutory protection mechanisms or family-based mechanisms or community-based protection mechanisms. These three focuses ideally highlight the struggle or the tussle in identifying the best means to protect children from maltreatment. Recent evidence from several developed countries, including the UK, US, and Australia, shows a focus on enhancing the involvement of community and neighborhoods and neighbors in addressing and safeguarding children from maltreatment as the new paradigm. Gary Melton, a known advocate of strengthening communities to prevent child maltreatment project, argues that only neighbors, friends, families, and the general public can effectively intervene and prevent maltreatment situations from worsening. In essence, he posited that it is important for us to strengthen efforts from ordinary residents in intervening or in responding to child maltreatment situations in their communities and in their neighborhoods. Within the community and the neighborhood-oriented child maltreatment research, the social disorganization theory, the good old social disorganization theory from criminology literature, and then always credited to Chicago School of Sociology, and the ecological theory from Russian psychologist Yuri Bronfenbrenner, provides theoretical support to explain community effects on child maltreatment. And these theories have been helpful in explaining risk factors of child maltreatment from the community and the neighborhood level. In contemporary community-based child maltreatment research, studies have examined community-level response and community engagement effects following the contemporary collective efficacy theory by Sampson and colleagues. The theory emerged from the social disorganization theory, was a contribution towards the social disorganization theory by Sampson, and it argues that, and it explains the processes by which social cohesion, if emanating from social ties, reciprocal neighborhood processes, influences informal social control, ISC, efforts among residents when they observe adverse circumstances. The theory basically explains that in neighborhoods where there are high level of reciprocal exchange, where there are high level of communication, where there are constant or frequent interaction among neighbors, informal social control will be higher because there will be some level of social cohesion or high level of social cohesion which assures or give residents the confidence to intervene or respond to undesirable behaviors within the neighborhoods. Recent results within child maltreatment research has followed this theoretical exposition. However, research results within child maltreatment and the protective effects of neighborhood collective efficacy have been marked by conflicting research findings. To address the mixed findings, we aim to analyze relevant current research to understand how the collective efficacy theory is applied within child maltreatment research and to unravel the causes of the mixed findings. 3 key questions guided the systematic literature review study. One, we understood, or we tried to understand, how the collective efficacy theory applied in child maltreatment research. And then two, in what pathways do the collective efficacy measures, the two main constructs, ISC and social cohesion, facilitate intervention or protect against parent-child maltreatment behaviors. And then finally, we aimed to highlight the type of, or the subtypes of child maltreatment that are examined following the collective efficacy dimension. As explained earlier, the main theoretical underpinning is the collective efficacy theory, and it was proposed by sociologist Robert Sampson. This theory emerged out of his contribution to the social disorganization theory. He found that from his study, or his milestone study on neighborhood research in the US, he found that even where there are high level of neighborhood disadvantages, such as, or structural disadvantages, such as poverty, unemployment, high level of residential turnover, and etc., neighbors within such impoverished communities or in such impoverished neighborhoods still has the capacity to develop informal control measures when there are high level of social cohesion. So he argued that there is a mechanistic sort of control, explaining how social engagements within neighborhoods creates enabling environment and context for neighbors' informal social control. So informal social control is a product of the sort of engagements or the sort of reciprocal exchange characterizing social cohesion, which influences intervention or prevention of child maltreatment issues within the neighborhoods. The theory is simplified as a process in which informal social control within neighborhoods are activated by social cohesion. And informal social control explains the willingness or actions of residents to intervene in addressing neighborhood social problems. It is important to acknowledge that the theory is based on the belief that there should be some sort of collective norms, or there should be some sort of guiding collective neighborhood norms that also strengthens this level of social cohesion and then informal social control. The theory has been used to explain or to understand neighborhood level responses in crime and then delinquent behaviors. And it has been adapted by recent child maltreatment researchers to provide a theoretical frame for researchers within the community-based child maltreatment research so that they can be able to develop neighborhood norms or neighborhood response mechanisms, or they can develop what we call collective efficacy enhancement programs so that neighbors will be responsive for community child maltreatment issues. So this theoretical model explains the collective efficacy theory. First, we begin by the level of transactional engagement, the level of reciprocal exchange that goes on within the neighborhoods. It can be ordinary greetings, engaging in community participation, and any sort of neighborhood process or any sort of neighborhood activity that enables neighbors to strengthen their level of engagement. It's characterized under the transactional neighborhood social process model. And this transactional neighborhood social processes influences social cohesion or characterizes social cohesion, which is the level of mutual and reciprocal exchange. And when this happens, neighbors will have the belief and the assurance to engage in informal social control. And they can either engage in it directly, indirectly, or deterrent. Within this exposition, or within this theoretical model, we argue that certain neighborhood behavior, such as guilt feelings or feelings of reprisal from neighbors, can deter a neighbor from actually engaging in informal social control, irrespective of the level of social cohesion. So these are some obstructors that collective enhancement programs should aim at minimizing within neighborhoods. So in our research, we searched articles from 4 key databases, including Web of Science. And we also did a specific journal search from child maltreatment specific journals such as Child Maltreatment, Child Abuse and Neglect, Children and Youth Services Review, Child Abuse Review, and then Journal of Community Psychology. Our study was guided by a key inclusion criteria. One was that articles should examine collective efficacy measures, ISC or social cohesion, as intervention or preventive mechanism for any subtype of maltreatment. And then also, articles should report findings from any or all of the following key stakeholders: parents, youth, children, and community members. We excluded studies that engage professionals because we aimed to understand ordinary neighborhood level responses, and that has been the focus of informal social control, enhancing the responses of ordinary neighborhood residents who are non-professionals. And then finally, articles that are empirical research articles published in academic journals using English language between 2008 to 2009 were searched. Quality appraisal. The final included articles were appraised following the 12-item checklist developed by the Center for Evidence-Based Management of the University of Oxford. And all the included studies scored a satisfactory points on this scale. So this is our PRISMA flow diagram showing that our search, including reference search and ancestry search, revealed 2,209 articles. And after applying full text reviews and then removing duplicates and then applying the study inclusion criteria, we identified 21 articles, which 20 were quantitative studies and 1 qualitative study. Key summary from the included studies. The majority of the studies, 13 of these studies, were conducted in the US, followed by studies in Asian countries, including Japan, Korea, China, Nepal, and then Vietnam. From these studies, child physical abuse is the most examined type of maltreatment in relation to collective efficacy as an intervention or preventive mechanism. Actually, 18 of the 21 studies examined child physical abuse. And a few of the US studies emanated from the National Longitudinal Study on Fragile Family and Child Wellbeing. And this is quite a common database within the US used to conduct research on child maltreatment. And majority of the remaining studies were cross-sectional studies from different parts of the world. Participants of these studies were mostly mothers, caregivers, and then few adults and community members. Now I'll move on to share some thematic areas or how we grouped the key findings from the research. 1, the protective effects of social cohesion on child maltreatment. Using specific generalized linear models such as nested logistic regression, negative binomial regression, and then the direct effects in social equation models. Inverse relationships between social cohesion measures and maltreatment behaviors were interpreted as denoting existence of protective effects. In 2 studies, high rate of social cohesion was associated with lower rates of basic needs neglect. And this was explained that when there is a high rate of or higher level of social cohesion, which is emanating from the level of engagement, the level of reciprocal exchange between neighbors, basic needs neglect will likely be low because neighbors will always be on a standby and they will be willing to provide basic needs support to children when they are maltreated. And when parents also know that their neighbors are also on the watchdogs, they are ready to provide such sort of support, they will also become responsible. However, in some instances, higher social cohesion within neighborhoods may influence residents to shield their neighbors by avoiding reporting severe maltreatment behaviors to formal child protection agents. The mixed findings in some studies confirm these setbacks. Using the nested logistic regression models and then Poisson regression models, which are all part of the GLM family, social cohesion was not directly associated with physical abuse and or any other subtype of maltreatment behavior in a study by Kim and Maguire-Jack. The argument is that Even though higher social cohesion or high level of social cohesion is found hypothetically or from the collective efficacy theory to influence intervention in child maltreatment situations. The evidence suggests that in some neighborhoods or in some cultural contexts, social cohesion may actually shield or influence the neighbor from reporting the maltreatment situation to child protection agents. However, what is missing here is that we don't know whether it also influences direct intervention, because reporting to child protection agents is considered as a form of indirect informal social control, which we will explain in our next section. Key findings from the protective effects of ISC on child maltreatment. Informal social control was also examined using the traditional measure of ISC, and I have to explain that in developing their theory, Sampson developed a collective efficacy scale, and it has been quite popular in research recently, yes, in recent research, yes. And this measure has two main measures, actually also developed from the collective efficacy theory. So it focuses on the two main constructs, social cohesion and then informal social control. So most studies within child maltreatment also used the collective efficacy scale. Actually, it also makes sense because that is you have to use the theory, the scale developed to examine the theory, hypothetically, yes. So neighbors' perceived ISC was found to correlate with lower incidence of child physical abuse and neglect. This suggests that higher expectations of ISC efforts from neighbors may deter parents from abusing or neglecting their children. On the contrary, studies from similar contexts did not find any significant direct association between informal social control, child neglect, and physical abuse. Emery, in several of his research in Southeast Asian countries, argued that or critiqued the informal social control measure used by Sampson. He argued that in adapting the theory within child maltreatment research, it is important to also consider the uniqueness or the differences in the kind of phenomenon that has been measured. Sampson's measure was actually intended to examine juvenile delinquents' behaviors and then neighborhood crimes. So Emery argues that these behaviors are often occurs in the public sphere, probably within the neighborhoods, and you expect neighbors to respond. However, child maltreatment situations, the majority of them occurs within the family, and the parents are actually the high number of perpetrators of child maltreatment. So it is important for us to ensure that we measure child maltreatment research within the family environment. Also, he critiqued Sampson's ISC measure by arguing that it failed to account for the type of or the kind of ISC effort. That is how the way and manner the neighbor will intervene when they observe the undesirable behavior. In response, they developed a modified measure of ISC dubbed ISC to CM scale, informal social control to child maltreatment scale, which addresses the above limitations by specifically measuring protective and punitive ISC efforts. This concept should be explained later. So in actual fact, Sampson's original scale had items, or the items were focused on deterrent ISC. So it measured how neighbors' willingness to intervene will have an impact on the behavior of people from desisting from engaging in undesirable behaviors. So it explains that when we have the perception that our neighbors are willing to intervene in maltreatment situations, we will deter from engaging in child maltreatment behaviors. So Emery argues that yes, this is quite true, but within child maltreatment research, the item measures should focus on the family, because most maltreatment situations occurs within the family. And then also, we should also measure how the neighbor intervenes, because in child maltreatment research, we do not only emphasize, even though the preventive dimension is the ultimate goal, we still have a high number of maltreatment situations occurring. And this is important for us to know, or for us to strengthen how we intervene. I mean, for us to strengthen primary level of responses or tertiary level of responses in child maltreatment situations. And that's the reason why he also emphasizes on trying to know how the neighbor intervenes. So you also find evidence on the protective effects of IAC following the direct and then the indirect IAC protective dimension. So the direct IAC describes the direct involvement to calm parents and provide support to the victim. And we term this as the protective IAC because the ideal notion is to protect the victim and then calm the perpetrator and then try to reconcile and make sure children are prevented from further maltreatment. And the indirect IAC involve actions such as supporting parents to the police or child welfare officers for punitive actions. So he termed this as the punitive IAC. And the idea is that when we engage in indirect IAC by reporting maltreatment behaviors to child protection agents, we are requesting that they should be punished. Even if they are not punished, in some jurisdictions, their children may be taken from them and placed in out-of-home care. And this in itself is a sort of punishment to the parents. So he termed the indirect form of IAC as a punitive measure. The direct form of IAC, which Emery and colleagues describe as the protective form of IAC, was found to be associated with less severe child physical abuse and moderated the relationship between very severe physical abuse and child externalizing behaviors. The idea is that with a protective dimension, it is posited that when a neighbor intervenes in a maltreatment situation, his protective efforts and then the salient way of intervening helps in minimizing the rate of abuse injury that will have occurred to the child. And then it also helps to give the child some sort of assurance and some sort of belief, some sort of neighbor to rely on when he or she anticipates maltreatment situations anticipates child maltreatment situations. These findings were consistent across studies from parents from Sao, Russia, and in Vietnam. So they have conducted a lot of studies in these countries, and they have actually confirmed the protective effects of the ISC within child physical abuse situations. However, the punitive measure of ISC showed no significant relationship with child physical abuse. These suggest that punitive measures such as punishment for abusive parents do not predict the odds of physical abuse occurring. So it also goes to explain that we should emphasize or re-emphasize on how neighbors intervene, because intervening to punish the parent might not be the best solution in all cases. Another issue that emerged from our research or from our synthesis of the included studies was that collective efficacy protective effects on risk factors of child maltreatment. In some instances, the collective efficacy measures, social cohesion, and informal social control were examined to mediate risk factors of child maltreatment. Margaret Jack found maternal depression to mediate the relationship between social cohesion in both physical abuse and neglect behaviors. Similarly, risk factors of child neglect and abuse is high when mothers' negative perception of their neighborhood processes were mediated by parent stress and internal control. So these findings also some sort of argued or showed that higher level of informal social control and then higher expectation of informal social control and then social cohesion could be primary preventive measures against child maltreatment behaviors, because they've been established to mediate relationships between risk factors of child maltreatment and then the actual maltreatment behaviors. However, you have to exercise some caution because these findings are all emerging from cross-sectional surveys, and we cannot establish some sort of confident level of causality. We also identified that some studies examined the influence of the transactional neighborhood social processes on collective efficacy. These transactional neighborhood activities, including community participation, social engagements, and intergenerational closure, were all found to be protective against different kinds of maltreatment behaviors. Intergenerational closure is one of the constructs Sampson argued to be protective against neighborhood disturbances. He defined intergenerational closure as the level at which, neighbors' knowledge or parents' knowledge about the friends of their children. So you have your children, right? And they play with some kids. So how well do you know these kids? So that is intergenerational closure. So this also sort of support the social cohesion measure. So when you have some sort of knowledge about this, you may be confident or you may be influenced to intervene when you see or observe any of these kind of children in facing maltreatment situations or engaging in some undesirable behaviors themselves. However, the relationship between parents' community participation and physical abuse and aggression was not significant in a study by Cow and Ogoyejak. The mixed results and contradictory findings in some studies suggest that neighborhood social processes should be examined as activators of ISC and not direct influences on parental maltreatment. So we should examine these neighborhood processes in relation to their influence on informal social control and not their direct influence on parental maltreatment, as explained in the general collective efficacy model. So this theoretical model, I termed it as the applied model, explains or summarizes the research findings following the collective efficacy theory. So from the vertical format here, we have the earlier framework which was developed to explain the collective efficacy theory. So we have transactional neighborhood processes influencing informal social control, which also impacts on the kind of ISC being engaged, either direct, indirect, or deterrent, the collective efficacy model. However, within this research, we found out that this construct has been applied in a more of a compartment way. Studies referenced above examined transactional neighborhood processes, the direct influence of transactional neighborhood processes on maltreatment behaviors. Social cohesion was also examined in several of the studies to influence maltreatment behaviors. And we also had a mediation model and a moderation model, where risk factors of child maltreatment were used as mediators to examine the influence of social cohesion on maltreatment behaviors. In some cases, they were used as mediators to examine the deterrent effect on maltreatment behaviors. So the references above here shows the type of studies from our included studies that examine the various paths. So we have more or less 5 different pathways that the constructs within the collective efficacy theory has been examined against child maltreatment research. And it is evident, clear, that there is indeed a compartment application. However, we do not discredit these findings because collective efficacy is some sort of a contemporary theory guiding research within child maltreatment. So these foundational studies are quite needed. However, we recommend that studies should build on by looking at the transactional and the sequential examination of the collective efficacy concepts. Evidence from the studies included showed a form of compartment. So we advocate for some sort of a higher level examination to apply the theory very well. In discussing some of the findings, samples drawn from South Korea, Seoul in South Korea, Hanoi in Vietnam, I found that direct intervention was negatively associated with children's injury another child externalizing behaviors. This is possible because by intervening to calm the parents found in the process of abusing their children, the magnitude of abuse injury is expected to be reduced, and parents may be advised to seek medical care for children. So the evidence also supports the protective dimension. The study also found that residents were more willing to likely intervene indirectly by reporting abusive incidents in unfamiliar neighborhoods than their own. This is quite unique or quite contradictory to the hypothetical transactional mechanism set forth by the collective efficacy theory, because it is believed that we are more likely to engage in informal social control within our own neighborhoods than unfamiliar. However, we've found a contradictory finding. There are some possible reasons for this, because residents who had little faith in formal agents in their neighborhoods compared to unfamiliar neighborhoods may be influenced not to report maltreatment situations in their own neighborhoods because they sort of lack faith in the child protection agents within their own neighborhoods. However, when you find yourself in an unfamiliar neighborhood, considering the skeptical belief of retaliation and the skeptical belief of some sort of guilt feelings, you may be forced to intervene directly by reporting the control agents and then having your safety assured. Also, in some ethnic communities, residents refrain from reporting child maltreatment because it is perceived as betrayal of family culture. So when you are in a neighborhood where there is this sort of collective cultural norms or cultural values, engaging in informal social control, intervening in child maltreatment situations may be low because you do not want to tarnish the image of your family. And in some cases, residents also refrain from reporting maltreatment behaviors due to the fear of retaliation or fear that children will be experiencing worse forms of violence. Several studies reported higher level of social cohesion to deter parents from maltreating their children. In the same vein, social cohesion could also mediate risk factors of parental child maltreatment, such as parental stress, and maternal depression. This means that enhancing neighborhood social cohesion could be primary preventive measure against child maltreatment research. And this is quite a key findings from the review of literature, because it is important that we establish some sort of neighborhood engagement that strengthens social cohesion, because when we do that, parents may actually be deterred from engaging in undesirable behaviors of child maltreatment. Within applied disciplines such as social work, this kind of primary prevention and proactive examination is needed as we aim to prioritize evidence that support primary prevention and eliminate risk factors as opposed to reactive intervention. In comparing the studies on relating the study to the general collective efficacy model or the framework, we also provide some directions for further research. The direct pathway examinations evidence in this model conceptualize the collective efficacy concepts, which is social cohesion and ISC, as separate constructs, which have independent protective effects on child maltreatment behaviors. This kind of protective conceptualization of collective efficacy concepts assumes that existing communities are already socially cohesive and strong in exercising collective control. Whilst achieving such ideal, cohesive, and protective communities is the primary goal, most communities are unable to exercise collective control, requiring the development of collective efficacy enhancement programs. Such programs should be built on the logic of the transactional collective efficacy model by creating avenues for parental engagement to enhance social cohesion and influence ISC. So from the applied model, it emerged that the constructs were examined independently against child maltreatment behavior. Even though we argue that this is quite acceptable as a form of foundational study, we should increase it, because such sort of examining these constructs independently explains that communities are somehow socially cohesive, and then also they are strong in exercising collective control. And this should not be the case when we are beginning to examine a theory in a new phenomenon. Because some communities ideally are not cohesive, are not actually able to exercise collective control. That's the reason why we have to examine the existing mechanisms so that we can identify ways to enhance collective efficacy and then neighborhood level responses within child maltreatment situations. Such programs should be built on the model we have developed. Also, we argue that cultural nuances should be carefully considered in developing collective communities because social cohesion may inhibit the exercise of ISC as reported in some ethnic communities. Very few studies within the child maltreatment research have laid emphasis on the expected ISC effort, that is the kind or the way the neighbor will intervene. Even within these studies, ISC efforts were limited to their effects on physical abuse, to the neglect of other forms of child neglect, other forms of maltreatment, such as neglect. Therefore, studies should examine ISC efforts using the informal social control scale developed by Emory, because it examines the actual actions individuals will undertake when they observe or anticipate maltreatment situations within the community. And this will help to extend knowledge on the application of the concept within child maltreatment and community-based research. In line with the collective efficacy theory and the hypothetical mechanism set forth in a general framework, we advocate for a pathway examination that draws the transactional link of how social cohesion mediate or moderate ISC efforts on parents' maltreatment behaviors. We also quite support that there should be more qualitative studies to understand residents in their views about cultural factors influencing ISC and then those that also inhibit ISC. We proposed some of these, such as guilt feelings and then retaliation. We believe that they should be examined and they should be explored in research. Also, we also advocate that studies from Global South, especially from Africa and then from other Global South countries, should examine the theory within child maltreatment research because it has a benefit of enabling researchers and child protection workers to develop collective responses and neighborhood level responses within child maltreatment. We recommend that community engagement and participation programs such as social clubs should be established to foster neighborhood cohesion and facilitate the teaching and sharing of parental norms and practices. Arguably, from the model or from the theoretical model of collective efficacy, you can see that it begins with the level of exchange, the level of transactional activities. So it is important for us to create that context for neighbors to engage in some sort of transactional activities. Also, community norms and values need to be reshaped to facilitate ISC. We have found that there are some negative community beliefs and negative neighborhood norms that may inhibit ISC and then social control. So we should be able to guard against these negative cultural norms in our effort to enhance collective and the neighborhood level responses. Also, residents need to be educated on the appropriate means to intervene. Our evidence thoroughly shows that the protective form of ISC by Emory is quite supported in several research because it has a peaceful way of intervening to safeguard children and then also to calm the perpetrator by explaining some issues that will ensure future prevention of maltreatment. And that should be taught within neighborhoods. Also, community programs should promote indirect ISC efforts by educating residents on maltreatment reporting procedures. We may believe that the protective form of ISC might be not well understood because reporting maltreatment behaviors in an appropriate manner might be able to enhance also neighbors' responses. So it is important for us to teach neighbors the reporting procedures. We have some of these in most of these child protection legislations, and neighbors should be taught so that they can peacefully or in a nice way or in a more cogent way report maltreatment situations by preventing other, so that they can prevent other unintended consequences. We conclude with our argument that it is important for us to support the community and then the neighborhood level responses within child maltreatment research, because it is indeed a best model to help countries, especially less developed countries that has not well developed formal child protection system. So it helps in igniting responses from neighbors and making everyone a child protection agent. Even countries, developed countries that has well-resourced formal child protection systems are moving towards the community level response, because it seeks to provide primary level intervention and early responses to child maltreatment. And we are hopeful that with this research insight, studies will be conducted to unravel mechanisms we can strengthen community level responses. The final report from this project has been published by the Journal of Health and Social Care in a Community, hosted by Wiley Publishing. And it has the reference Abdullah, Emery, and then Jordan, Neighborhood Collective Efficacy and Protective Effects on Child Maltreatment. It's quite a recent journal just published. And we are hopeful that researchers will follow up to read our article in order to have more insight and then more explanation to support the community and the neighborhood level responses. Thank you, IFSW, for the opportunity to share my research with the audience and then all social work researchers, child maltreatment researchers around the world. We are indeed in a difficult moment, and we are hopeful to come out stronger so that we can, however, in doing that, we should not forget that we have a core responsibility towards our people, our clients, and then our service users. Thank you. Thank you.